Jimmy is mid-conversation, the studio lights are soft, and you can almost feel the warmth between the three of them on that couch. The audience is laughing at some harmless joke, but underneath the smiles there's a tension nobody in the room has words for yet. Keanu sits a little forward in his chair, hands quietly folded, listening more than talking like he always does. Sandra is beside him, that familiar, bright laugh filling the space, making even the camera operators grin. Jimmy watches them both with the antennae of a seasoned host, sensing that there's something deeper between these two people than old movie memories and red carpet photos. For a moment, it's just three friends trading stories on late-night television, until Jimmy decides to ask the question he's been holding back. He leans in, his tone suddenly softer, almost careful. "You know," he says, "whenever people talk about the two of you, they always mention that movie. But they also talk about the way you look at each other. Keanu, what is it about Sandra that stayed with you after all these years?" The crowd responds with a playful "oh," expecting a light-hearted answer, maybe a joke, maybe some sweet anecdote. But the second Jimmy finishes the question, something in Keanu's face changes. His shoulders shift, his eyes lower for a heartbeat, and the smile that had been effortless a moment ago suddenly looks fragile. Sandra turns to him, surprised, reading his expression the way you only can when you've known someone through the quiet, unglamorous parts of life. She doesn't laugh like the audience. She doesn't tease. She just watches him, her own smile softening into concern. The cameras zoom in, capturing a man who has spent decades avoiding attention when it comes to his private heart, now placed gently but firmly in the center of it. The band goes quiet. Even Jimmy falls still, sensing that he might have stepped onto ground that is more sacred than sensational. Keanu draws a breath that's barely visible but somehow echoes through the room. This isn't the usual talk show banter anymore. This is that thin edge where a person decides how honest they're willing to be in front of millions of strangers. His life has been marked by loss, by the kind of grief that never fully leaves, and somewhere in all of that, Sandra has been a steady, quiet presence. Not in the headlines, not in tabloids, but in late-night phone calls and simple check-ins that never made it into interviews. He thinks of those moments now, and the weight of them presses behind his eyes. Sandra's hand inches just a little closer to his on the couch, not quite touching, but close enough that he can feel the warmth of it. Her eyes say, "You don't owe anyone this. You don't have to go there." But they also say, "If you do, I'm here." The audience, sensing something raw is about to surface, leans forward as one, the laughter fading into a hush that feels almost reverent. For the first time tonight, Keanu looks directly at Sandra instead of the host or the crowd, and his voice, when he finally speaks, is lower, rougher, and nothing like the polished stories people expect from late-night TV. He opens his mouth to answer Jimmy's question, to explain what she means to him and how her kindness once changed the course of a very dark moment in his life. But just as the first word forms on his lips, his gaze catches on something in the front row that stops him cold. There's a woman in the front row, maybe late 30s, clutching a folded piece of paper like it's the only thing holding her together. Keanu's eyes pause on her just long enough for Sandra to notice. The woman isn't cheering or smiling. Her lips tremble, and she's trying, desperately, not to cry. Under the bright studio lights, that effort is losing. For a second, it's like the cameras disappear and it's only the three of them on the couch, and her. Keanu's first instinct is the one he's trained into himself for years. Protect, deflect, keep it light. He could crack a joke, slide past the question, turn it into something charming and forgettable. That's what people expect. That's what keeps him safe. But the look on the woman's face feels too familiar, the quiet panic of someone who's holding a story inside that hurts too much to say out loud. It reminds him of hospital corridors, of small apartments after funerals, of standing alone in crowded rooms because the person you need most isn't there anymore. Jimmy follows his gaze, briefly confused, before realizing there's a crack in the atmosphere that wasn't there a moment ago. Sandra shifts slightly closer, her shoulder brushing his. She whispers, just loud enough for him to hear over the silent audience, "Hey, you okay?" It's a simple question, but it lands like an anchor. He could nod, pretend, move on. Instead, he swallows, feeling the familiar battle inside him, between the part that wants to stay hidden and the part that is so tired of hiding. He thinks about all the people who see him as a symbol of quiet strength, who project their own pain onto him because they've heard fragments of his story. He's never asked for that role. But what if, tonight, he didn't run from it? He turns back to Jimmy, then to the audience, and finally lets his eyes return to Sandra. "What is it about Sandra that stayed with me?" he repeats, buying himself a few precious seconds. Sandra watches him carefully, her own heart thudding, because she's never seen him this exposed on camera. She knows his instinct is always to downplay his own hurt, to lift others up instead. It's part of the reason she admires him, his humility, his stubborn refusal to center himself even when the world insists on it. But tonight, there's something else flickering behind his eyes, a decision forming, like someone standing at the edge of a high dive, debating whether to jump. He draws in a slow breath. "There was a time," he says quietly, "when things were really dark for me. Not movie dark. Real life dark." The audience is silent now. No murmurs, no nervous laughter, just a heavy stillness. Sandra's fingers curl around the hem of her sleeve. She remembers that time, remembers the version of him who answered texts hours late, who disappeared between shoots, who seemed to move through the world like every step cost him something. Jimmy's expression softens, his showman energy fading into something gentler. He hadn't expected this, but he knows enough to stay out of the way. Keanu continues, his voice steady but low. "People always talk about success, fame, all that. But they don't talk about the nights when you feel like none of it matters. When you're surrounded by noise, and somehow you've never felt more alone." He pauses, the memories pressing hard against his chest. He wants to look away, to shield himself, but Sandra is right there, her presence a steady flame beside him. "In one of those nights," he says, "I got a message from Sandra. Just 3 words. Nothing dramatic. Just, 'Where are you?'" He glances at her, and she's already blinking back tears, remembering the exact text, the way she stared at his name on her phone, worrying about him across the miles. "I called him," she whispers, the words slipping out unplanned. The studio microphones catch it. He didn't want to talk at first, but he did. There's a flicker in the crowd, the shared breath of people realizing this conversation has drifted far from the usual polished anecdotes. Keanu offers a small, grateful smile, then lets it fall away. "That call," he says, "was one of the reasons I didn't do something irreversible." The sentence hangs there, heavy and unmistakable. Somewhere in the audience, someone gasps. Jimmy's eyes widen, and his hand instinctively moves toward Keanu's shoulder before he pulls it back, not wanting to intrude on the moment. Sandra's hand finally finds Keanu's on the couch, fingers wrapping around his knuckles with quiet, steady pressure. She had known he was struggling back then, but not that the edge had been that close. Keanu doesn't look at the cameras. He looks down at their joined hands. "People think kindness is small," he murmurs. "A call, a text, a joke. But when you're standing on a ledge in your own mind, sometimes that tiny bit of kindness is the only thing between you and the fall." He lifts his gaze again, eyes glistening but resolute. "That's what Sandra is to me. She doesn't make a show of it. She doesn't shout it from rooftops. She just shows up. even when you push her away. Especially then. The woman in the front row has stopped trying to hide her tears. She's openly crying now, clutching that folded piece of paper like it's some kind of life raft. Keanu notices, and this time he doesn't look away. Something passes between them. Two strangers connected by an invisible thread of shared hurt. Jimmy, sensing the emotional weight in the room, leans forward carefully. What made you answer that call, Keanu? He asks, voice barely above a whisper. Keanu holds the question in the air, feeling the answer stir inside him, raw and unpolished. He's standing at a crossroads. He can give a safe, tidy response that will still earn applause, or he can tell the truth and risk breaking himself open in front of millions. Sandra's thumb rubs slowly over his hand, grounding him. The woman in the front row stares back at him, silently pleading for something real, something that might matter after the credits roll. Keanu takes another breath, gathering the courage he's not sure he has, and finally decides to say the one thing he has never admitted publicly about that night. I didn't answer the call because I was strong, Keanu says, the words coming slowly, like he's picking them up from someplace heavy. I answered because I was scared of what would happen if I didn't. The honesty of that confession ripples through the studio. It's not the polished version people expect, the one where he heroically chooses life in a neat, cinematic moment. It's messy, human, and painfully real. Sandra's breath catches. She had always hoped he chose her call out of trust, not desperation, but suddenly she understands it was both. He looks at his hands, at the way Sandra's fingers are still wrapped around his, then continues. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment. No lights. Phone face down. I'd turned it off twice already. And then, it lit up again. Her name. Third time. His eyes lift to hers with a small, almost apologetic smile. I remember thinking, why won't she just give up on me? And then I realized, that was the real question. Why did I want her to? The audience holds its breath, drawn into the quiet war he's describing, the one that doesn't involve explosions or stunts, but the invisible fight just to stay here, to stay human. Sandra's gaze is steady, but inside she's replaying that night from her side of the story. She was alone in a hotel room, thousands of miles away, scrolling through messages, sensing something wrong in the way his last text had trailed off into nothing. She'd typed and erased a dozen different things before landing on those three simple words. Where are you? She hadn't known what to say, how to fix it, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. Hearing him now, realizing just how close he'd been to disappearing into that silence forever, makes her stomach twist. That hotel room suddenly feels like it's right there on stage with them. Jimmy leans back, his usual quick wit held in check. This isn't a moment for punchlines. He's watching two people who have known each other for decades step, carefully, into a truth they'd both been skirting around in public. What did you say when you picked up? Jimmy asks, his voice gentle, respectful. Keanu's lips twitch into a sad, knowing smile. Nothing, he answers. For a long time, I said nothing. I just breathed. And she stayed. She didn't rush me, didn't ask, what's wrong? What happened? She just existed with me in that silence until it didn't feel like it was crushing me anymore. Sandra's eyes shine, because she remembers that call too, the rasp of his breathing, the weight in it, the way every second felt like it might tip one way or the other. She remembers telling him about absolutely nothing, a silly thing that happened on set, the color of the weird hotel carpet, how room service kept bringing her the wrong tea. She'd talked about everything except the one thing they both knew they were really talking about, his pain. The woman in the front row presses the paper to her chest, as if trying to absorb courage through the fabric of her shirt. Keanu glances at her again, and something in his expression softens even further. And then, he continues, when I finally spoke, I didn't say, I'm okay. I didn't say, I'm fine. I said, I don't know how to keep going like this. The room feels smaller now, more intimate, as if the walls have drawn in to cradle this confession. And instead of trying to fix it, she said, okay. Then don't. Don't go like this. Go differently. 1 minute at a time. Just stay on the phone with me for 1 more minute. Sandra remembers that line. She'd said it hoping it might sound stronger than she felt. At the time, she wasn't sure if it was enough. Now, hearing that he's held onto those words for all these years, she feels a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude that he stayed. Guilt that he was ever in that place at all. She squeezes his hand, wishing she could go back and sit beside him on that apartment floor, not just on the other end of a fragile phone connection. What I learned that night, Keanu says quietly, is that courage doesn't always look like standing up and giving some speech. Sometimes it's just not hanging up. Sometimes it's answering the call when you're sure you have nothing left to say. His eyes drift to the cameras now, fully aware of the countless people watching who might recognize themselves in those words. And kindness? It's stubborn. It doesn't walk away just because you push it. It knocks again. And again. And again. He gives Sandra a look that's almost shy. She kept knocking. The audience is so silent that the hum of the studio lights can almost be heard. Jimmy swallows, his own eyes glistening. So when I asked what stayed with you about Sandra, he says slowly, you're saying it's that night. Keanu shakes his head gently, surprising everyone. No, he replies. It's what came after. His tone shifts, not lighter, but deeper, like the root of a tree. Because after that call, she didn't treat me like I was broken. She didn't act like she'd done something heroic. She teased me again. She argued with me about movies again. She reminded me I was still me. Sandra's laugh breaks through her tears at that, a watery, genuine sound. She gave me back normal, he continues. And when you've been living inside your own darkness, normal can feel like a miracle. There's a pause, a fragile peace settling over the moment, until Jimmy glances toward the front row and notices the woman with the paper trembling, almost shaking, tears streaming freely now. He hesitates, then makes a choice as a host and as a human. Keanu, he says softly, nodding toward the woman, I think someone out there really needed to hear that. Keanu follows his gaze again, and this time, instead of just acknowledging her with his eyes, he does something no one expects on a tightly timed late-night show. He lets go of Sandra's hand, stands up slowly, and steps away from the safety of the couch, turning toward the edge of the stage as the entire room watches, breath held, wondering what he's about to do next. He walks toward the edge of the stage, the studio lights following him, but for once he seems completely unaware of how many eyes are on him. Security glances at each other, tense for a moment, but Jimmy subtly lifts a hand to reassure them. This isn't chaos. This is something else. Keanu stops just a few feet from the front row, close enough now to really see the woman's face. Her mascara is smudged, her lips are trembling, and the folded paper in her hand is crinkled from how tightly she's been holding it. Up close, he realizes that paper isn't blank. There are words scribbled all over it, some crossed out, some circled, like it's been rewritten 100 times. For a second, he's back in his own apartment, staring at notes he never sent, apologies he never made, goodbyes he almost did. The woman looks up at him, startled that he's actually standing there. She tries to pull herself together, to smile, to say something polite, but she can't quite manage it. Her voice cracks on the first word. "I'm sorry," she whispers, as if her tears are an inconvenience. "I didn't mean to." "You don't have to apologize," Keanu says gently, cutting through her shame before it can root itself any deeper. There's a softness in his voice the microphones barely catch, but the room feels it more than hears it. "You're here. That's enough." He nods toward the paper. "Is that for the show? Or is it for you?" The question isn't casual. It's precise, kind, and it lands with the weight of someone who knows how hard it is to bring your private pain into public light. She hesitates, then slowly unfolds the paper with shaking fingers. It was supposed to be a letter," she says, her voice small but determined to keep going now that she started. "To you. But then I kept changing it. It turned into a letter to myself, I guess." She gives a short, embarrassed laugh that breaks halfway through. "I wrote it on the train here." It was either that, or she stops herself, eyes dropping. The unfinished sentence hangs in the air, obvious and terrifying, or I wasn't coming at all. From the couch, Sandra's heart clenches. She's seen that look before, in friends, in strangers, in her own mirror more times than she likes to admit. She rises without thinking, moving to stand at the edge of the stage too, just behind Keanu, not to take over the moment but to reinforce it. When the woman glances up again, she sees not a distant star but two people simply standing in front of her, tired, tender, very human. "Can I read you something?" the woman asks, half to Keanu, half to the floor. The audience might expect him to nod and step back, to let her speak into the void of bright lights and cameras. But he doesn't. He kneels down so he's level with her, no stage between them, hands resting loosely on his knees in a posture that says, "I'm not above you. I'm right here with you." Sandra steps a little closer, her hand resting on the rail behind him, both protective and present. "Only if you want to," Keanu answers. "And only if you're reading it for you, not for us." His eyes are kind but firm. He knows what it's like to perform your pain instead of actually dealing with it, and he refuses to let her do that to herself, even for his sake. The woman takes a slow, unsteady breath, then nods. It starts with, "Dear me," she says, voice cracking. Not "Dear Keanu." That's what I changed. A few people in the crowd let out a soft, surprised "oh." Already, the letter feels like something more than fandom. "Dear me," she reads, the word shaking but clear enough to reach every corner of the silent room. "If you're reading this, it means you survived another day you were sure you couldn't." Her eyes blur. She blinks hard and keeps going. "You think you're a burden. You think your friends are tired of checking on you. You think no one would notice if you stopped answering the phone. But you're wrong. You're wrong because people like Keanu exist. People like Sandra exist. People who don't give up on the third call." Sandra exhales sharply, hand covering her mouth for a second. Jimmy, still by the desk, looks away, overwhelmed, then back again, unwilling to miss what's unfolding. The woman swallows, then reads the next line, her voice trembling more with each word. "Tonight, if you get scared again, I want you to remember something. You are not broken for needing help. You are brave for asking. Answer the phone. Answer the knock. Don't hang up yet." Her composure finally slips. Tears spill over. She presses the paper to her chest again, as if trying to push the words back into herself where they belong. Keanu's eyes are shining now too. He doesn't hide it or joke it away. He just lets the emotion be there, in his face, in his voice. "That," he says softly, "is one of the bravest things I've ever heard." He glances back at Sandra, then at Jimmy, then at the cameras, making sure the wider world is included in what he's about to say. You know, people put us on these pedestals, he continues, like we are different, stronger, untouchable. But the truth is, we are all just trying. One day at a time. 1 minute at a time. Just like you. Sandra nods, stepping up beside him so she's in the woman's direct line of sight too. I've needed those calls, too, she says quietly, her usual confident tone stripped down to something raw and honest. I've been the one on the floor, ignoring the phone, hoping it would stop ringing so I wouldn't have to admit I wasn't okay. The admission hangs there, startling in its vulnerability. We are all on both sides, sooner or later. Sometimes we are the one knocking. Sometimes we are the one praying someone won't give up knocking. The woman lets out a shaky laugh through her tears. I didn't think I was going to make it to this taping, she confesses. I thought, maybe I'd just disappear instead. But then I kept thinking about you, Keanu. About how people talk about everything you've been through, and how you're still kind. I thought, if he can still be kind after all that, maybe I can survive one more day. Her eyes search his, desperate for confirmation that her hope isn't misplaced. Was I wrong? The room feels like it's holding its breath for his answer. Keanu doesn't rush. He looks at her the way he looked at Sandra, the way he looked at himself in the years after his worst losses, with a mixture of grief and fierce, stubborn compassion. You weren't wrong, he says finally, each word slow and deliberate. You made it here. That means you've already survived every worst day you've ever had. That's not failure. That's strength. His voice tightens, but he doesn't look away. And if you have another night like that, write yourself another letter. Call someone. Text 3 words. Even if they're just, where are you? Don't disappear. You matter more than you know. The audience erupts into applause, but it's not the usual wild, entertainment roar. It's something heavier, more grateful, almost protective. Jimmy wipes at his eyes openly now, no longer trying to hide his reaction. He glances at the producers offstage, who are signaling about timing, breaks, sponsors, all the mechanics of television. But for once, he raises a hand and shakes his head, silently telling them, not yet. This is more important. Up at the edge of the stage, Keanu straightens slowly, offering the woman a gentle, steadying smile. Can I ask your name? He says, microphone picking up his question. She hesitates, knowing that saying it out loud will make this moment real in a way that might follow her far beyond this studio. Then, with visible effort, she opens her mouth to answer, only to be interrupted by a sudden, sharp sound from behind the cameras that makes the entire audience jump and turns all heads in a single, shocked motion. A metal stand crashes to the floor behind the cameras, the sound slicing through the fragile silence. A boom mic tips, a light wobbles dangerously. For a split second, everyone flinches, the spell of the moment shattered. A stagehand lunges, catching the light before it falls. Someone laughs nervously, someone else swears under their breath. The audience looks around, disoriented, grasping for the emotional footing they just lost. But Keanu doesn't move away from the front row. He glances back to make sure no one's hurt, then turns right back to the woman, refusing to let the clutter steal the moment from her. His focus settles on her again like a protective circle. It's okay, he says calmly, more to her than anyone else. We are still here. Those 3 words land with unexpected weight. We are still here. The room begins to settle, the nervous energy dissolving into something quieter, more grounded. The woman wipes her cheeks with the back of her hand, breathing hard like she's just run a long distance. She swallows, then finally answers the question he asked before the interruption. "My name is Elena," she says, voice small but steadying with each syllable. Saying her name aloud feels like stepping onto solid ground. Keanu repeats it gently, as if committing it to memory. "Elena," he says, "thank you for staying. Not just for the show. For tonight." She lets out a weak laugh. "I almost didn't," she admits. "I was sitting on the curb outside the studio for 20 minutes, trying to decide if I should just go home and not come back from whatever I've been feeling." She glances down at her letter. "I told myself, just get inside. Just sit in the audience. You don't have to talk. You don't have to be seen." And then, she gestures vaguely to the stage, to him, to all of it. And then this happened. Sandra steps closer to the rail, her expression full of that fierce tenderness she saves for people who are hanging on by threads. "Sometimes," she says gently, "the bravest thing you can do is just show up and let life surprise you." She looks at Elena, but her words echo for so many watching. "You didn't plan this. Neither did we. But here we all are. Still breathing. Still trying." From his desk, Jimmy finally stands and walks toward them, his usual showman grin replaced by something quieter. "Elena," he says, "I know this is a weird question to ask in a room like this, but how are you feeling right now?" He doesn't say, "Are you okay?" because that's too easy to dodge. He asks how, not if. It leaves room for whatever truth she's carrying. Elena considers the question, eyes darting from Jimmy, to Sandra, to Keanu. The cameras, the lights, the hundreds of strangers around her, it's all still intimidating, but there's something else now too, a sense that she's not just an anonymous face in a crowd. "I feel seen," she finally says, almost surprised by her own answer. "And terrified. And lighter. Like I put down a bag I've been carrying so long I forgot it was heavy." Keanu nods, understanding etched into the lines of his face. "That's what happens when you tell the truth," he says softly. "It doesn't fix everything, but it makes the load shareable." He glances at the audience, at the millions beyond the cameras. If anyone out there is feeling what Elena's feeling, what I've felt, what Sandra's felt, you don't have to carry it alone. You're not weak for needing help. You're human. The producers are signaling again. Time is running out. Ad breaks are looming. The machine of television trying to resume its rhythm. Jimmy looks at them, then back at the small, fragile circle at the front of the stage. Elena clutching her letter, Sandra steady as a lighthouse, Keanu kneeling between two worlds, the glittering facade and the raw, beating heart of reality. He knows what the show usually demands. He chooses differently. "We are going to take a break," Jimmy says into his microphone, but his eyes stay soft. Not a commercial break. A real one. The audience murmurs in surprise. He turns to the crowd. "Nobody move. Nobody leave. Just take a breath." The band, sensing the tone, doesn't play the usual upbeat sting. The lights don't flash. For a long moment, the studio exists outside of television. No jokes, no segments, no sponsors. Just people. Keanu stands slowly, his knees protesting a little, and offers his hand to Elena. "Can I show you something?" he asks. She hesitates, then nods, taking his hand. He helps her up, guiding her gently to stand just inside the edge of the stage, not center frame, not spotlighted, but near enough that she can see what he sees. The rows of faces. The cameras. The crew. The quiet expectancy. She looks overwhelmed, but is right there beside her. "This," he says, gesturing to the room, "this is what courage looks like. Not the stage. Not the cameras. You. He turns slightly so he's facing both her and the audience. Elena came here thinking she was just going to sit in the dark and watch a show. Instead, she reminded all of us that being vulnerable is not a performance. It's a lifeline. He looks at Sandra, who's watching with tears she stopped trying to hide. And I'm standing here because, once upon a time, someone refused to hang up the phone. Sandra steps forward and slips her arm through his, then reaches out her other hand to Elena. There's a small, almost disbelieving smile on Elena's face as she finds herself between them. These two people she'd only ever seen on screens, now flanking her like old friends. You know what the wildest part is? Sandra says, voice shaking with emotion but threaded with a spark of warmth. You think we are the ones inspiring you. But you're inspiring us. Right now. Watching you choose to stay, to speak, to be here, that's going to stay with me. Elena laughs through her tears, a sound that's half sob, half relief. I don't feel inspiring, she admits. I feel like a mess. Sandra squeezes her hand. So do I, she says simply. Most of the time. Keanu nods in agreement. Same, he adds. You just don't usually see it between the jokes and the movie clips. There's a long, full silence, one that isn't awkward or empty, but strangely comforting. A few people in the crowd wipe their eyes. Others nod, as if silently answering some question inside themselves. Somewhere, in countless living rooms where this will eventually be streamed and replayed, people will see this moment and feel something loosen around their own hearts, some belief that they are beyond saving begin to erode. Finally, Jimmy steps closer, rejoining the circle in a way that doesn't break it, just widens it. We do have to close the show, he says reluctantly, glancing at the nearest camera. But I don't want to end on a joke tonight. I want to end on this. He gestures around them. On a reminder that behind every laugh, every movie, every talk show, there are humans, hurting, healing, trying again. He turns to Elena. Is there anything else you want to say? To yourself, to someone watching, to whoever might need to hear it. The question catches her off guard. She looks down at her letter, then out at the sea of faces, then back at Keanu and Sandra. Their expressions don't push her, they welcome her. After a deep breath, she speaks, not reading now, but from somewhere deeper. I want to say, if you're watching this and you feel like I did when I wrote this letter, she says slowly, please don't make any permanent decisions on a temporary night. Her voice gains strength as she continues. You don't have to be strong alone. You don't have to pretend you're okay. Answer the call. Send the text. Knock on someone's door. Or write yourself a letter and bring it to a room full of strangers if you have to. Just stay. One more day. One more minute. Keanu's throat works as he swallows back the swell of emotion. That's courage, he murmurs. Right there. He looks straight into the nearest camera, his gaze steady. And for anyone who's thinking, yeah, but no one would call me 3 times, hear this. You are worth calling. You are worth checking on. You are worth staying for. Even if your brain tells you otherwise. Brains lie. Pain lies. But the fact that you are still here, that's the truth. Sandra, wiping her cheeks with a quick, almost self-conscious gesture, adds quietly, and if you're the one who notices someone fading, be stubborn with your kindness. Call again. Text again. Show up again. You don't have to fix them. You just have to be there. Sometimes that's the thing that keeps a heart beating. The audience rises to their feet almost as one, not in a frenzied standing ovation, but a slow, deliberate rising, as if to say, we witnessed this, We honor this. The applause that follows is strong but layered with something deeper than entertainment. Gratitude. Solidarity. A promise, unspoken but shared, to check on each other a little more. To answer one more call. To knock one more time. Jimmy, voice thick, manages. We'll be right back, out of pure habit, then catches himself and shakes his head with a soft, almost embarrassed smile. No, he corrects. Tonight, we are just going to say good night. Hold on to each other. Be kind. And if you need help, please, reach out. He gives a small, respectful nod to the camera. From all of us here, thank you for staying. The theme music plays quietly, gentler than usual, as the show fades to black. But the story doesn't end with the credits. When the cameras power down and the audience begins to file out, there's no usual scramble for selfies or autographs. People move slower, pausing to hug friends, to check on the strangers beside them who are crying too. In small pockets around the studio, phones are pulled out, not for photos, but to send messages that start with, "Hey, where are you? And you cross my mind. Just checking in." On the edge of the stage, Keanu, Sandra, and Jimmy stay with Elena a little longer. They talk off mic now, quietly, like old friends instead of star and fan. There's laughter mixed with tears, that awkward, beautiful kind of laughter that only shows up after you've survived something hard together. Before she leaves, Elena folds her letter carefully and tucks it back into her bag, not as evidence of her weakness, but as proof of her strength. Outside the studio, the night air is cool and sharp. Elena steps onto the sidewalk and looks up at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, they don't feel like a world happening without her. They feel like she's part of them. Her phone buzzes in her pocket. A friend. A sibling. A coworker. She doesn't know yet. But this time, she doesn't silence it. She answers. Back inside, as the crew packs up, Sandra turns to Keanu, her eyes still red but shining. "You know you just changed a lot of lives tonight, right?" she says softly. He shakes his head, that familiar humility surfacing. "We all did," he answers. "You, Jimmy, Elena, everyone who's ever made that third call." He pauses, then adds, almost to himself, "I just didn't look away this time." Sandra smiles, that deep, warm smile that's more gratitude than amusement. "I'm glad you didn't," she says. "I'm really, really glad you didn't." She rests her head lightly against his shoulder for a moment, a simple, wordless thank you that reaches back over years of friendship, late-night calls, and all the invisible battles neither of them has ever fully described on camera. And somewhere in the quiet that follows, away from the applause and the noise, a simple truth settles over them both, and over everyone who watched. Kindness is not small. Courage is not loud. Resilience is not glamorous. Sometimes, it's just answering the phone. Sometimes, it's sending 3 words. Sometimes, it's staying 1 more minute. And sometimes, when a host mentions a name on a late-night show, and a man's reaction leaves everyone speechless, it's because behind that look is a story of a life almost lost, a friend who refused to let go, and a reminder that even in our darkest hours, we are never as alone, or as beyond saving, as we think.